I think one of the worst things you can do is assume that what worked at your last adventure is going to be the playbook for the next one. And I've definitely worked for or with VPs or CXOs that brought in a playbook mentality before listening to their team, their customers, their future customers, and fail flat, versus the ones that came in, humbly listened to their team, sought feedback from the market, and then architected something that really worked.
I'm Devin Reed.
And I'm Sheena Badani.
And you're watching Reveal, the Revenue Intelligence podcast powered by Gong.
Keep watching here to see the full interview. Or if you like to listen to podcasts on the go, check out the links in the description below.
And if you like what you hear, subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. Or all of them. Why not? And while you're there, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. We personally read every single one, and I think I speak for both of us when I say they mean the world to us.
Could not agree more, Devin. Now, without further ado, here's the episode you've been waiting for.
Mike, welcome to Reveal. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Hey, thanks a ton, man. I'm honored and super excited to be here.
Well, let's dive into who you are before we dive into our topic today, which is how to win and dominate new verticals. So you're the CRO at Rent Dynamics. Can you give me the high-level view? What are you working on as CRO? And, what is Rent Dynamics all about?
Yeah, happily. So I'm Chief Revenue Officer at Rent Dynamics. I am overseeing the entire customer choreography, which is what I call it. So sales, account management, and marketing. And as a company, we're a real estate focused product. We are exclusively serving the multifamily sector. And we've got 3 core products that are truly impacting residents across their entire experience with multifamily or apartment communities across the entire country.
Okay, customer choreography. You smiled when you said that. I think you knew I was going to dive into that. I've never heard that in all my days. So tell me a little bit more about what that is and maybe why you call it that.
So kind of a Mikeism is that I worked for Nike for the first 5 years out of my career, and I just fell in love with the power of branding. And jumping into vertical specific technology after that, I really just kind of realized that if you want to bring people along in your career, the more that you can do to brand things and to anchor people in the success of programs, the more good you can do to raise the boat within your organization. So when I joined Rent Dynamics, I did a lot early in my listening tour and saw an opportunity to really brand the organization. So we call ourselves Team Go-to-Market, but we're all focused on making the customer choreography or experience from the first time they hear about us in marketing to making that renewal really predictable in CX, a great experience for everybody involved.
I like that a lot. I like that a lot as a past seller and a current marketer. That's hitting home for me. And I could easily take a hard right turn and we could focus on that for this podcast. But I'll refrain because throughout your career, you've always worked at vertical specific software companies. So I'm curious, can you give us a quick rundown? Like what are those verticals that you've served?
Yeah, for sure. So the umbrella industry that I've served for the last 8 years since leaving Nike has been real estate, but really specifically within the real estate category, the 3 verticals I've been focused on have been multifamily. So think apartment communities, senior living, tons of different care levels within that. So independent, assisted, and then self-storage. So a very incredible business, even though it's really boxes with people's stuff in it. But those have been the 3 I've been focused on.
Yeah, I got images of Storage Wars for the last one. I'm sure you've heard that joke before, though.
Oh, yeah.
So what are the advantages of being a vertical solution? Like, why is that kind of your thing? Because I know you also host a podcast on that topic as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that when you look at outside looking in, it's like, well, why don't you just use enterprise technology in these super niche or nuanced verticals? But I think that's really the why behind it. You start to jump into technicality, integration is different, or the way that companies run their business when they're really, really focused, it's different, or the people or the customer, it's just a little bit different. And I think that the TAM for Gong is certainly different than the TAM for the businesses I've been a part of, but the table stakes are still super high. And I think for me, being able to really, really nail both product market fit and go-to-market fit in these vertical specific solutions is hard, but once you get it right, you really have a massive opportunity.
I might be getting ahead of myself, but I'm curious because I'm imagining now like competitive deals for you all. And so I'm kind of thinking like, what would companies be missing by not having a vertical specific solution? Like, does that give you a competitive edge, I imagine, in certain deals, or?
Yeah, it does. I mean, like without getting into our product at all today, like one of our core offerings is a CRM. So we have a CRM that on-site teams use to turn prospective residents into happy residents that live there. And one of the questions outside looking in that we get all the time is, well, why don't we just use Salesforce or HubSpot, enterprise
Sure.
tech? And the nuance within integration or the way that they're operating their businesses, it's just so different that someone a long time ago made a decision to go vertical specific. And now there's a huge category of real estate CRMs. And so I think it's almost like an onion. There are just so many different layers that kind of make certain tech just perform better when it's truly designed for that specific category, or in this case, vertical.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. So your team, right? So you're leading a team. How large is your go-to-market team, or team GTM, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, you got it. So last year we scaled our business from 91 to 141 full-time employees while growing revenue by about 80% year over year. My org, last year when I joined, we were 18. Now we're about 34 people across sales, account management, and marketing, and constantly looking at the data to decide what the next headcount needs to be across that whole team. But I've got 3 great leaders, and they've got great teams within them, and I'm really, really proud about the team we're building.
As you're building that team, because you're vertical specific, are you looking specifically for people who have that background in that specific vertical, or maybe people that have vertical specific background but not that vertical? You know what I mean?
Totally. So there's like 3 different types of people I love to hire. As a leader, like a huge hiring philosophy for me has been, if you're hungry, humble, and smart, if I align to being a great coach, like I can turn you into being a great part of our team. And what I've seen is that an eclectic team wins. And so folks that come from within the same vertical, always helpful. They bring a book of business. If they've done a good job in the past, that usually means pipeline for them pretty quickly. If they've been part of a different vertical, pharmaceutical, eyewear, you can kind of think of all sorts of different ones that are still quite big. They understand what it looks like to go deep versus going wide, and I think that's helpful. And I've also had a lot of success bringing people in from the enterprise, Microsoft, Oracle. And so I think an eclectic group then understands enterprise sales methodologies and things like that. A little bit of everything is really feeding into the playbook that I'm trying to assemble.
Totally. Diversity of expertise in action there.
For sure. And I mean, even I know for you talk about it a lot on LinkedIn, but even diversity in background. Like some of the best people that have sold for me had degrees in things that were so far from even the realm of business. And I think there's a lot of good things that happen when you get an eclectic group together, especially in customer facing positions.
Absolutely. I've got an English degree, and I went to school to be a teacher. So look at me now. You never know.
There we go. I love it.
So for the sales motion, right? So how does a vertical specific sales motion differ from the enterprise motion?
It's an awesome question, and it's one of those things that, like, I think when you jump into a sales motion, it's really important to listen before you act, especially when you're like defining a motion for that respective vertical, because I've hired and worked with a lot of leaders that came in from the enterprise, big technologies and the billions of dollars of cap rates. And they assumed that the thing they did would be successful here. Mm-hmm. And here's an example of a nuance in the real estate space that blows a lot of people's minds. Conferences still drive a tremendous amount of pipeline in real estate. Because a lot of transactions for properties, when they're selling these big multifamily complexes, they're still revolving that around an in-person cadence of conferences.
Right.
So for us, like, that's one of the most important pieces of our sale, even though to a lot of people in the enterprise, that's archaic because the pandemic kicked in, we all went virtual, and we've done just fine. So those are the kinds of things that I think are really worth studying, listening, to make sure that what you architect matches with where your customers are truly spending their time.
No, it makes a lot of sense, and I've heard that before too. And I don't think it's not a knock on enterprise folks with enterprise background. I think it's just a mindset of like, well, what worked for me in this realm, worked so well. I'm sure it applies over here, right? We've heard it other folks on the show, like one of the biggest mistakes you can make of like launching into a new geography, especially if you're in the States moving to Europe or EMEA, is like assuming the sales process will be about the same and the marketing should land about the same. It's like, no, you got to be careful with some of those assumptions.
Yeah, I think whether you're like just checking your ego before stepping in a new position, or definitely before coming from a bigger, wider motion in like the enterprise to a vertical specific one, I think one of the worst things you can do is assume that what worked at your last adventure is going to be the playbook for the next one. And I've definitely worked for or with VPs or CXOs that brought in a playbook mentality before listening to their team, their customers, their future customers, and fail flat, versus the ones that came in, humbly listened to their team, sought feedback from the market, and then architected something that really worked. And I think there's also a balance there, because especially in leadership, you want to prove yourself pretty quick. That is part of the role.
Yeah, you want that quick win. Everybody does. I like it. I've had a few execs join Gong, not necessarily my direct, but just in kind of in general. And I like when I've heard a couple of times, I'm on a listening tour right now. I'm not here to make any decisions or assumptions. I'm here just kind of in the intake process, which seems to serve them well because, like you said, you get more information, right? Now you can take past experience and current scenario and make even better choices.
Totally. And I mean, I think for me, it's like one of the easiest ways to get wins while also bringing people along, which I think especially in leadership is super important when you're making changes, new technology. I mean, I implemented 3 massive technologies in our team last year. And if I'd done that rogue, could have run a huge risk on not getting adoption and buy-in from my team, which would have meant no insight for me as the executive over revenue, versus listening and understanding where the pain, where the problem was. And a lot of it was in tech. Mm-hmm. And then what an opportunity to go get a win because I listened to the team first. So I think we can all learn from going a little bit slow early so we can really accelerate and go faster later on.
Absolutely. Well, let's shift a little bit here because you're specific, vertical specific. I've said that probably 5 times now. I might say it 5 more times in this one. Not something in my everyday vernacular, but some folks listening might be going into new verticals, right? Maybe they're launching a new product specifically for vertical. Maybe they're taking their current product, right, to a new vertical. What are some of those risks of being vertical specific, or like, going into a new vertical? And in our prep call, you had mentioned if you get it wrong, you get it wrong in a big way. So maybe what do you mean by that? And then I guess I kind of the initial question.
Yeah, let's start with the latter, like getting it wrong, and like the impact that makes. I think like you look at like a total, let alone a serviceable, addressable market for Gong compared to Rent Dynamics, much different numbers. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, when you get it right in a small industry, there's this incredible flywheel effect because word of mouth, we're hearing Chris Walker talk a lot about dark social right now. We are winning in the world of dark social by playing into the voice of our customer and creating this flywheel effect. But at the same time, if you get that wrong and have a couple botched deals or really unhappy customers or whatever the thing might be, in a smaller industry, you run a big risk of impacting your ability to go win deals in that given market. Or in my case, it's really hard to hire if the reps who have worked for you in the past had a hard time selling. And, it's all about acceleration and it's all about throughput. And I think when you get it right, you just can go so fast and momentum feels so good in a vertical specific environment. But once that momentum slows down, it takes a ton of calories to get that thing back going and in motion, whether that's on the sales side, the retention side, or I spend a ton of time recruiting for sure.
That makes a lot of sense. That word of mouth is so powerful, which is challenging because it's not captured very often, right? It happens in text messages and passive conversations and stuff. But yeah, when the word gets out, like it's not really that great of a place to work, or the product's not that good. I was only with it for 3 months before ditching it. That has a huge impact. So as folks are kind of maybe building the strategy, going about scaling it in that kind of realm, what are some of the risks that they should look out for? Maybe the pitfalls.
Yeah, I think that like some of the pitfalls are not truly understanding the market you're trying to serve before you step into it. And I think that Mark Roberge talks about it a ton in a lot of his literature. Been to some of his seminars. I've actually been able to do some one-on-one mentorship with him. And there's a big difference between getting product market fit and go-to-market fit right. And I think that it's really easy to assume that you look at this industry, you think the technology is dated, you're going to bring in something really sexy. You're going to throw AI on top of it, and it's going to land. It's going to kill it. You're going to go raise some money a little early, and you're going to go. And in my experience, product market fit is important, but it's also important to objectively do market research to understand the why behind why those current technologies and incumbents exist, and then to understand if that market is going to have the appetite for change. Because a lot of industries, especially small industries, use laggard technology for a reason. There's a lot of businesses in the USA that still run their business off of a 3-ring binder that could be disrupted, but there's reasons why they have not been yet. So I just think being thoughtful, being research focused, and not being too fast. I think when you go in too fast, you run a huge risk of getting it wrong in a big way again.
Well, I want to call out something real quick. You've mentioned now Chris Walker and Mark Robert, so I can tell you're a true student of the game because these are people I'm familiar with. Mark Robert actually was the first person on Reveal a few years back, so kind of
one of my favorite episodes.
I can tell the way that you're kind of approaching learning about this stuff. So how do you go about understanding your market better, right? Maybe this is you're already in it. Maybe you're entrenched, you already kind of know, but maybe to start, I don't know if you know, did you come from Nike knowing real estate really well, or were there some actions you kind of took to say, hey, let me and the team really understand what's going on here? How do you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a couple things that have worked really well for me personally that have become kind of part of the Mike Wolber playbook, if you will. I think that one of the biggest lessons I took from Nike was this like radical obsession with understanding the customer. And I always thought it was weird when I worked there because these high paid executives would fly out all over the world, not just the US, to meet with consumers. And it was all about the consumer. And I'd be like, why are you flying to Japan to meet with kids that wear our running shoes when we wear their running shoes? We're their consumer. Can't we just talk to ourselves? Like, very ignorant of me. And what I realized is that the reason that the Nike flywheel has gone so strong is that Phil Knight just set this tone that it was all about delighting the consumer and anticipating what the consumer was going to need next. And as I joined a smaller company, G5, where we first got in touch, I think you realize that if you keep your customer close to your chest, you learn the voice of the customer. And if you can know your customer, there's a great chance that you can codify what your future customer needs as well. And I think it's one of the big things I've taken super seriously. It's why I'm so active on LinkedIn and so few of my competitors are not, is that if I can be in front of them early and often, I know what works, I know what doesn't. It helps us craft the value proposition. Our demos, they kill it because we understand why our customers choose to stay.
I like that a lot. Yeah, so social is a fantastic place, and I know there's still so many. Speaking of archaic and like 3-ring binders, which is fine if you're listening and I don't know, writing notes from this episode in one. But you know, it's a fantastic place to get feedback and almost real time feedback, right? As you're like testing messaging, you can really observe what's working. And to your point, this is a landscape or an arena that you're kind of dominating because you're the only one there. Right? If other people aren't even there trying to kind of, compete with you in that arena, in that social space, it gives you, tons and tons of green room to get that market feedback.
And I think that to just like jump off of that really quickly, I think there's like these two conflicting schools of thoughts in go-to-market. One is like meet people where they are and market to them where they want to be marketed to or whatever it might be. And I think there's like a total conflicting statement with that, which is be where your competitors aren't and do things that you're comfortable doing, even if they're hard to measure, like social or podcasting. And I think for me, that's become a big part of our motion is just doing things that our competitors aren't doing, things that aren't necessarily scalable, but things that truly turn customers into raving fans and win the hearts and minds of people. And I think that when you play the long game, really good things happen when you do that kind of stuff. Newsletters, posting daily, all that kind of stuff.
I feel like you just not took a page out of my playbook, but like we're reading from the same book because I agree with all of those things, which unfortunately, a lot of teams won't go build where they can't measure super clearly, or the attribution isn't linear. So I'd love to see you using that to your advantage there. Speaking of kind of measuring, and I know I kind of went against attribution there for a sec, but you talked about getting it right? I've got this flywheel going. How how do you measure that? What are some of the metrics that you're looking at to say, okay, things are, accelerating at the right speed, maybe any kind of risk, metrics for potential risk? Like, I'm kind of curious, like, what does Mike Wolber look at from a metric standpoint in this regard?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things, and probably a lot of head nods for anyone who's in the revenue office that's listening. But for me, it's all about revenue. It's all about predictable revenue, and it's all about that because it's all that my boss cares about. I work for our CEO, and I think for me, marketing sourced revenue is the most amazing metric ever because it shows me that no matter how people found us, marketing is opening up opportunities for our sales team. We're not doing MQLs. We're really focused on sourced revenue from marketing. I think that one of the things I look at a lot is pipeline velocity. So understanding the speed that we're seeing pipeline move through our sales funnel. And that's a really important thing for us so we can understand how we can improve the sales motion to make sure that it's good both from a sales experience, but also that we're focused on the right segment within the market, because we compete with companies that are better served for the enterprise, where we're more served for the mid-market, for example, and that's okay to me. And so understanding where you're winning the fastest then feeds into the last one, which is NRR. Net revenue retention is really important, and not just client retention, but the overarching growth within our book of business. And when we see the certain segments that are really growing 150+% NRR year over year, that helps us really understand where we should emphasize our focus. And so those are probably the three core ones that I spend the most time really thinking about.
No, totally makes sense. I love when I hear, marketing focused on revenue. It's kind of old now, but the old, why sales and marketing don't align. Well, when the end goal, when their North Star is not the same, there you go. It's pretty clear. And so, yeah, take it or leave it. MQLs can be good early indicators in my book. It definitely is not a bad thing. But to your point, if that's the end goal for marketing, and then sales is worried about the dollar signs and actually getting revenue, you can kind of read between the lines there.
Exactly.
So, Mike, I've been at a few companies on the sales side where they're cracking open a new vertical, right? Big, usually top 3 strategic initiative for the whole company that year is get into this new vertical. We've kind of touched on it before a little bit today, but how do you know when you're really ready to take that on?
It's a great question. I think one of the things that's important is to understand what your end goal is as a business. And I think one of the things I've experienced, and I've also heard about through mentorship and friends I know in various industries, is a lot of companies move too fast to open up that second vertical or that second market, even like you talked about with opening up a new geo. And I think it's really important to understand where your product is best suited to win within an industry. Not everyone's going to be able to win in the small kind of corporate segment, the mid-market and the enterprise within their space. Sure. And I think it's really easy to get excited when you start to get momentum in one segment, and then to assume that the best thing you can do is open up a second vertical.
Right.
At G5, one of the biggest decisions we made was to not open up a new vertical, but to move up market. And so we opened up a national accounts program, and we went up market within the marketing realm. And it was the 2 biggest growth years during the 6 years I was there, was moving up market within the same industry. And so I think there's always options to segment the sales org or to go down market to more of a self-service model, which are all amazing opportunities within a given vertical. And I think my ultimate advice would be get as many playbooks as you can. And then when you decide to go into a new one, assume that it will all be different, so you don't make those mistakes that we talked about earlier on in the podcast.
I like that a lot. And so how do you prepare? What are some of the pitfalls that our listeners can be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I think there's a sniff test in sales and a sniff test in marketing that really matters. I think that authenticity is important. I'm a huge fan of the challenger sale. And I think one of the things that I've always applied and my teams now apply is that teaching for differentiation is a huge opportunity still in 2022.
Absolutely.
And when I say the sniff test, you're talking to a business owner and you want them to believe that you have something that they need. And if you cold call or send them a message or whatever the medium is to get their attention, and it doesn't hit their expectation, good luck getting them to take that call or that meeting. And I think that's where understanding how they talk about their customers, multifamily versus self-storage, it's resident versus tenant. And if you use resident and self-storage, great example of cold calling an owner who would have been a great customer, but you got the dial in correct. So I think that's where making sure you're really thoughtful so you can play the long game as you enter a new vertical is super important, even though that sounds pretty tactical.
You know what? It's tactical, but if you haven't thought that out and then you don't have the insight to see that that's happening, right? You can be going through this motion and not understanding why, your strategy isn't working. It's like, well, at the finish line, you're saying the wrong words that are not resonating. We did a similar-ish exercise as we're starting to go, and have been going to verticals outside of, or industries outside of tech. People don't call reps. They're called agents in certain verticals. And so getting that right is super important. Yeah, it's tactical, but the way that you talk about things internally typically is how you end up talking about them externally. So if you don't make that a very conscious decision internally, like you said, it'll start to bleed out in those, really important executive conversations, whether it's in a cold call or closing call.
For sure. And I mean, one of the things that's worked well for me is really obsessing having tactical relevance in the sales cycle. And so my board saw, good signs of sales success in the back half of last year and was like, let's throw gas in the fire. Let's add more reps and let's go hard on this new product line. And, my mentality was, no, let's make sure we have the motion right before we bring reps in so they can be successful. So I operated as a frontline AE for months to understand the best demo, use Gong to really validate the feedback we were getting against competitors. And we codified a literal sales playbook. So as we've brought on new reps, we're exceeding ramp, we're getting them to successful, and it's becoming a compelling reason for the team to say yes to working here. And I think all that stuff matters everywhere, but I really think it matters more when you're in a smaller industry.
I love that. I love that. Getting back in the trenches, as it's called, and learning. That's great. Last kind of question, kind of random, but on topic, is like, what about attacking multiple new verticals at once?
I think it can work. I think it totally can. I think that one of the things that is dependent on the company, the funding, like the phase that you're in as a business, is that when you try to have a go-to-market team serving multiple verticals, it can be really hard to almost like compartmentalize from this customer to this customer when they are in different worlds. And objection that you can receive from investors is that your org structure can seem top-heavy when you're going at multiple verticals. Because one of the things that I've seen work really well is verticalizing your organization structure as much as you can. A vertical-specific marketing team that's focused on the plays for that specific customer. Vertical-specific sales teams, vertical-specific CX teams. And it's like, wait, we have 8 VPs and we're only $10 million. And I think that's where once you figure out what's working, there's a great chance you can scale it. And I'd say having that 2 to 4 year plan and having really good alignment with your investors and the runway you're going to need is super important. Because when you try to spread a team too thin across too many different plays, too many verticals, I think that's where you run some risk if you don't have the overhead to support it.
Mike, we like to ask the same question to all of our guests to wrap up. And that is, how would you describe sales in one word?
Adrenaline.
Interesting. Of all of our interviews, we've never had that answer. Would you mind elaborating?
I hate to lose and I love to win. I'm the person who can't ever answer that question because I like and hate both.
Right.
Being part of a winning team is the most addicting feeling in the world. And building highly functioning winning teams is even better. And I think there's an adrenaline factor. And one of the things that I think for me I've learned over the past couple plays is that sales sets the tone for a business. And Gong is epitomizes it. I mean, the motion, the winning mentality, it's everywhere. I follow probably 50 of your AEs and I'm a 2-time buyer. And I will say that when you get it right and when you win, that is adrenaline. And to me, that is the realest thing. And it's why I will forever align to revenue, because you have an opportunity to set the tone for other careers and to create futures for people, to change minds. I don't want to be a sales guy. Let's just try it for a year. Do you want to control your income? And all of that stuff to me just feeds into the adrenaline, which is why I said that one.
I like it. And I like it a lot because you can't buy that feeling. You can't manufacture that feeling. It's only can be earned. So I got a big smile on my face. I like that a lot, Mike. Well, hey, thanks for hanging out with me on a Friday. I know folks probably listening to this on a Monday or Tuesday or something, but it's Friday afternoon, and I'm feeling great going into the weekend having hung out with you. So thank you for sharing your expertise.
Huge honor. Thanks a ton for having me.